Good morning. Good to see you all. Thank you for inviting me. I'm not sure it's going to be that much detail. Bear in mind, 15 minutes. So this is going to be high octane, high pace, hopefully energetic, and I hope we can get some stimulated questions at the end of it. I would say that on the back of what's happened in the last week, and say a number of colleagues having just returned from the large property exposition across in France, there's no doubt at all that as tough as some of the environment is in this kind of post-Brexit, post-Trump world, there is a huge amount of optimism which is not naive, but targeted investment that is ready to be finding itself a home in the UK and indeed maybe selfishly within the West Midlands and the Midlands of this country. So I'm standing here energised by what's happened last week, talking to investors, funders and colleagues from a number of markets around the world. It's not naive, but it's going to be really tough. And what I've been asked to do is talk about how we could think about this environment and use it to stimulate the notion of both city level but also a city region economy in the light of that context, but also the fact that we are on the eve, clear of understanding in detail what we might want to drive forward around the industrial strategy, which we've had a couple of great hours already on, as well as the fact that we've just received and need to respond cogently to the Midlands engine strategy to understand that evidence drives everything. That as great as it is to have a sense of pace and scale, what is it that we're going to do and where does the evidence take us to be able to drive an economy and the type of economy we want for our people into the future? So that's the question I'm going to try and answer. And this is us. So one of the two jobs I have is over a year now as the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority. Now, I'm conscious there'll be a number of people in this audience that will be aware of what the Combined Authority is, where it came from, its genesis, its scale. But I thought it would be useful for those that necessarily don't know so much about how devolution, certainly in an English context, has played out over the last few years, just to give a framing. And in that framing, you'll understand, if you take nothing else away, that there are some pretty straightforward, probably 3 steps to energising, catalysing the scale of economy that we're referring to here. And that is, one, to have a very, very clear vision for your place. Now, place hasn't been mentioned yet. Greg was very clear within the industrial strategy that it's got that sense of these things only ever happen in our places, and we must move from the abstract to actually how things really get done. So one, you have that vision and a clarity of leadership around it. Secondly, you have a very clear evidence plan for how you're going to deliver that out. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our plan within the West Midlands context and the wider Midlands. And then thirdly, you have absolutely a fully invested, understood, levered plan which then delivers that in detail across the sectors that you know are going to grow. And I suppose the 3A bit, and this is something that's maybe not come up so much, all of this happens horizontally, vertically. The messiness of it all happens in our places. So somehow you need to have this attrition and understanding of how you make sense of this on a daily basis. So this is us. This is a bit about scale of ambition. And I've said this time and time again. I said it last week to various audiences. There is no way that 2 years ago anyone could have given us a chance in this part of the UK to have been standing in front of an audience like this talking about the largest combined authority in the country, covering a population one in excess of 4 million people, with an electorate of about half of that. And we'll go to the polls on May the 4th for the first elected mayor for that combined authority, covering, as you can see, a significant swathe of the middle part of our country and locked into the notion of a Midlands engine, thinking about the exposition of Midlands UK on a global scale. And just for those that know our world within public sector and the need to have grown a much more mature leadership across boundaries, it's probably just worth reflecting before we talk about how we've tried to achieve it, that covering what was initially 3 local enterprise partnerships, over 20 local authorities, now a 4th local enterprise partnership taking on right up to the Welsh borders, with a raft of business interests, sector interests, private sector, a whole raft of interests. To be able to have come together and stay together at that level is truly game-changing. I'm not making any value judgments about how well we're going to do it. My point is, no one will give us a chance to have convened ourselves at that scale. Now, being an economist, one of the things that we did very early on, I was determined to do, was whilst argue for scale and breadth and cross-border agglomeration about how we deliver on an increasingly tough internationalising market, was to say, are we coherent as well? and clear in terms of travel to work, in terms of how that area works, it's got a fundamental coherence about how we believe we can catalyse, regenerate our cities, and our three great cities, certainly in the West Midlands of Birmingham, Wolverhampton and my own in Coventry, and do it in a way which absolutely is where the economic evidence is taking us. So this is where we started, and it's a significant scale of ambition. Very few people have given us the chance, and I really want to hammer that point home, because this is about political maturity. It's about goodwill from businesses at all levels, but it's above all about the ability to come together in a collaborative way, which is beyond mealy-mouthed compliments about how we're hugging each other, and about actually how there is a bottom line interest which we can deliver at scale. And if we created this kind of sense of how do we change the game, restructure that significant part of this country, then do it, my second point, beyond the ambition and the vision, but to actually say, well, what is it that actually the econometric data, the sectors in the past that have struggled and atrophied, but those that we know are going to actually grow the future prosperity, we've already heard about them, but do it in a way that absolutely locks in the things that have not been talked about enough already this morning. How do you create the conditions, not just for that economic growth and prosperity and locking in the right investment for the future, but also you take people with you? Because the truth in many parts of our country still is that deep and wide inequality and disparity. So we've got to find about the right way through the inclusive growth and the idea of actually locking in our aspiration to literally grow the economy over a decade and a half, but actually to make sure that we're using all of our assets in a way that, quite frankly, the West Midlands, and I would argue the wider Midlands, has never done before. Our asset base, our potency, our potential has never been realised. And you could use that in terms of the metrics around productivity, gaps, which we've talked about already, but a raft of other ways in which we've just never got our act together at this way in this time. And I think this is our way of saying, here is an aspiration, an economic plan which is based on where the data's taken us, which is literally going to get the eyes turned. And what we want to do in terms of our strategic economic plan, make our mark, make us there on not just a national basis, but on an international basis, as a big, significant player to be taken credibly, was to do something really important. For those, again, that maybe are inside the tent of public-private partnerships, how collaborations work at scale, you might think, well, why is this important in terms of how you go about doing this and catalysing for a really strong, coherent plan? What you don't do is ride roughshod through existing planning mechanisms. Because actually what you do is say that each of those local enterprise partnerships, initially our three in the West Midlands, had evidence-based plans which local growth funding was linked to, and the spirit, first of all, working together is to say that's not going to be enough. But we start where we are there, and we understand how you can get the specific strengths coming out of each of those economic plans, but do so much more. The 1 + 1 + 1 does no longer equal 3. It equals a lot more than that. And the ability for added value of working at scale not only de-risks the delivery in the existing plans, it layers another almost strategic economic plan above that, which actually respects that which is already in play, but drives us faster and deeper in terms of the economy. And that's exactly what we've tried to do. We could choose, and please, those that are interested, have no chance to have a look so far, go onto our website in the West Midlands, look at the economic plan. There's hundreds of pages of technical appendices about how we're trying to really understand the way in which our economy is working and how it should work in the future. But this slide, bear in mind, this is a decade and a half. So we're already from baseline, kind of year and a half into our really important economic plan for the future. We could have picked a number on this infographic to share with you, but maybe if I pick out two. The top left, the determination, not just through those plans that I shared on the previous slide, but by this new economic plan, to have understood deeply, and I'll end towards the presentation around what those sectors are, but looking at where we've come from so far, attrition, those sectors that we know are going to struggle. We've already heard about the sectors around artificial intelligence, digital, robotics, the future, what they might look like. But do that job creation not as a case of bingo, and let's pick a number, and let's just think hard about how we can actually deliver that, but really bottom-up basis, strong econometric data about how we believe we can stand in front of you credibly and talk about over 500,000 net new jobs over that period in the areas that we know is where we need to grow and where we then know it challenges us in terms of skills and productivity to make sure we've got the workforces of the future. And then the other one, which we haven't got time to go through any others, let me just pick the one towards the middle bottom. because I don't think this is being amplified enough. And I'm not naive. We need to be really clear about what our economic future looks like within the West Midlands Combined Authority and the wider Midlands. But equally, I think as custodians for the future generations, when quite frankly, we will never get the chance to physically, socially, economically regenerate our great cities and our towns at scale, that we do this in a way which goes after that 3.9 billion gap. Because remember, for those that were close to this, the rationale for combined authorities and devolved bodies coming in was to do two things at the same time. Drive the economy, prosperity for the future, but at the same time, through those levers, go after at scale the reform of public services and deliver greater outcomes for the people that live in our cities and our towns, rather than letting them be missed by for generations, which has happened in the past, where those inequalities widen and deepen. So that just under 4 billion every year is a gap between, in the West Midlands Combined Authority, that which we gain in from the Exchequer and that which we expend on high-demand services, including education, social care, health, welfare, etc. Now, you know, because I know, as it drives me forward, that not only is that an intolerable economic anchor back down on our region, it represents far too many of our families. Tens of thousands of our families across that large geography who are absolutely caught in a downward dependent spiral on public services which are no good for them, their family, they're way away from the job market, and we can't any longer carry on funding it to that level. So how do you lock in all the discussions so far this morning, use the green paper on the industrial strategy, a renaissance of some of our great cities, but to take people with us in a fundamentally different way? This is one of the most difficult challenges, which I don't think is necessarily being amplified in the way that it should. I'm going to skip over these, but these are important issues about simple infographics. But for those that know the West Midlands, for those that know the Midlands, and yes, manufacturing heartlands in many ways in terms of our economic history and our story, but progressing to a very different future, because we've lagged behind so significantly around our value add and our productivity, to be able to stand on platforms and say our economic plan for a devolved body with an elected mayor has got a cogent plan with investment behind it to deliver gains on productivity and to cross over that national line by 2026 is something which is driving us forward. Now, of course, every quarter, every year, we've got to be clear about how we're edging towards that. But we must have that aspiration the way that I said earlier on. And clearly the jobs as well are incredible value-add jobs that are going to be created at this scale. And how do we get that story narrative right for all the people that live, work in our region at the moment, rather than it appearing abstract? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for an apprenticeship strategy? What does it mean for my son, my great son? These are really big issues in terms of how we move forward. And that just visibly shows the gap which should drive us on, because at the moment it's clearly being jettisoned to the sidelines rather than core in what we're doing within a combined authority area. For those that aren't close, the devolved body with an elected mayor had for 30 years a commitment from government for its first devolution deal in our neck of the woods for just getting on towards 40 million a year revenue committed for 30 years. That immediately gave us the ability to create headroom of in excess of £1 billion, to then use it as melded finance to think about existing capital around HS2 and the high speed that's already in plan clearly for the West Midlands in terms of the interchange, but to optimise everything in and around the high speed network. And then to be able to think about cogent prudential borrowing, levered finance. Brilliant conversation earlier about pension funds. My own in the West Midlands, very little, absolutely tiny investment in some of the areas we talked about earlier on, but also geographically in our region. And we understand the risk issues, we get that, but the world has to move on from a different kind of melding. That £8 billion infrastructure programme to deliver our ambitions laid out in that plan is the largest single investment infrastructure programme that the West Midlands has ever seen. And it covers actually a significant transport play from those Welsh borders right the way across to our East Midlands colleagues and the whole of the Midlands engine. I haven't got time to go through that, but look at it. This is a classic example of where economies are working differently now. This is a levered approach to think about all of those things that we know either make an economy stall or accelerate forward. But it's the play between each of those and within them that is going to make the difference as whether we deliver our economic future or not. So I know there's a number of academics in the room, and the other thing that we were determined to do was to actually give credibility to understand that modern economies, and particularly in this internationalisation, working around big cities, city regions, need to understand this ecosystem. More than ever before, need to understand not just where houses, new homes are going to be built at scale, where the new jobs are going to be created, and how we can connect our people seamlessly in an integrated way between those new opportunities and create a leisure and a livability option, which we've never really given at scale before, only can be understood with deep investment in a model which doesn't just go the usual transport metrics, but brings all of these things into play. We're a year and a half into building this. We believe it's unique. It's actually what it's enabled us to do is not de-risk all of our investment decisions on that 8 billion, but give our politicians, the mayor, when he or she comes in, an understanding of bang for buck and an impact on communities when particular investment is made in place A and what that means for place B across the wider city region. And that's incredibly important. Happy to talk more in detail about that another time. Please check it out because it's a really important model. This you won't see too much detail. This is kind of where I wanted to close, because if you can set out, as I hope we've done, for a series of opportunities, an aspiration, a vision-led approach, which is well-led across sectors for a large part of our country, which is what we've done through the West Midlands within the Midlands UK, then you have a cogent plan, which is based on proper econometric data to deliver that strategy, and then an investment programme, which is levering the right things that we believe can deliver the right growth for the future. Then what you're led with is making sure that you're evaluating, you're understanding the impacts that those are having on your place. Are we shifting? Are we making that game changer in the way that we should? And it'll be no surprise to people that if you look down at the green areas, you've got the priority actions which we believe are across those sectors where the evidence is taking us. But take your eyes to the right, hopefully you can see it just. People, business, place. The point I want to end with is in this kind of febrile, frenetic environment that still feels like it in our places, there is something happening. And we've got to use industrial strategy and a raft of other levers between central government and a completely reformed sense of how you deliver growth, the right kind of growth in our places, by locking in business interests of all sorts, people across our places. We've seen an unbelievable coming together, a federation, a collaboration of the community and voluntary sector at all levels, new sectors emerging within the West Midlands as a direct result of us creating the combined authority, which is merely a shell in which to deliver at scale and to de-risk our economic futures. But my point I want to leave you with is all of this has got to find a way of being contextualised. Because one of the things I've said time and time again, and the more I talk to people, the more I realise this is true. As a result of the very considered discussions we had earlier on, which I thought was brilliant insight in terms of we need to just think about some of these structures, regulation, how we're going to respond calmly, evidentially to an industrial strategy by listening to some of the challenges and accidents and maybe deliberate challenges from the past and projecting it forward. That's all fine and well. But our people, across that 4 million population, across the Midlands UK, people that are working in political positions, policymakers, delivering this kind of agenda, genuinely still feel like we're caught in some kind of pinball machine. There's a huge amount of, some would say collateral damage, others would say deep uncertainty about where this is going to go. And people are trying to find means of connecting. So my final comment is, if we can find a way of understanding all this evidence, using this as a way of stimulating a very different type of future for our cities, for our places at scale, then we've got this final chance, because I don't think we're going to get it again, to regenerate, to reimagine our cities and our regions in the UK, to project a much more confident face to the world, but above all, create some opportunities for those people that have been left on the sidelines for far too long. And that's an opportunity which gets me out of bed in the morning, and I think should stimulate these kinds of debates into real practice, because ultimately we know what works is what goes on in our great places up and down this country. Thank you very much.